Um, Apologies for absence is the first item agenda. Would the governance manager let us know of any apologies?
Thank you, Chair. There haven't been any apologies from members today, but we have had an apology from the Chief Executive who wanted to be here today but is on holiday.
We've all got to have a break sometimes. So, I note no apologies from Councillor Smith, but obviously we will hope and acknowledge, hopefully, when he arrives. Which I thought it was there. So, does any member present wish to declare a disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest in any items being considered today? Okay, I can see no indications there. And normally at this point, I think said, obviously those declarations of interest can also be made at any point during the meeting, should that become apparent, or if you ever thought that you need to make it known. The third item, before we move on to the election of a vice chair, is announcements. And as is the way with announcements, it is within my gift of being the chair to kind of give a sort of an oversight for the meeting or any sort of updates. I think this is the first time I, as a mayor, have actually been a chair of a new committee. All the other sort of committees have generally been established before my arrival, so that I have to confess to a certain degree of excitement at what is presenting itself in terms of the investment committee. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of the members of this new committee and to say how proud I am of the direction of travel with these new governance processes showing a kind of the maturity of our organisation and the transparency of our decisions. I particularly emphasise the word our. Increasingly, I've noticed at the thematic committees of the Combined Authority and have really welcomed as members from different constituent authorities have begun to realise that when they come to a meeting like this, it's kind of our combined authority. And although it's important to represent the areas which we all come from, the ability to kind of look at the broader picture and the idea of using kind of more extended thought processes and strategy, I think, is beginning to come out. And one of the reasons why I think we need this committee in itself. And as I was sort of preparing myself and looking at the minutes, I was reminded of the processes within the first year when I arrived as the mayor, and how I, on a certain level, personally struggled, but also to work with the board members at the time to understand what was the priority, and instead of just a kind of what can we do for our area, the idea of pulling together a strategy that works for all seems very, very in touch with what we need to be doing going forward. Major investment, there are always inherent risks, and this forum, I'm going to ask you to really challenge myself, the board members, our officers, and really explore and oversees those who are working in a sort of collaborative manner to achieve these organisations' aims. As I say, I'm excited by it. Hopefully that comes across in at least some of my preamble. And with that, I am going to move on to item number 4, which is the important point of an election of a vice chair for this committee. And I have had some discussions with one member of the committee, that is Councillor Wakeford, who I have asked, and he has indicated he would be interested in the position. But this is a committee which is open to all. So is there anyone who would like to put themselves forward for the position? Well, I'm very glad I had the conversation with you, Councillor Wakeford.
Nomination in a second.
Can I be a proposer?
You can be a proposer, yes.
I would like to be a proposer, and I would appreciate a seconder, and I'm going to take that from Councillor Smith. And welcome, Councillor Smith. Thank you for joining us. For those in favour, we can take the vote now. Okay, I think that's unanimous. That's okay. Yes. Thank you. Councillor Wakeford is appointed as the vice chair of the committee. Thank you, Sam. Right. having put yourself forward, we now have to understand what the terms of reference are. Possibly we should have done it in a different order, but it is the terms of reference which Matt here, as our Director for Legal and Governance Monitoring Officer, will introduce.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. This will be a very brief introduction. It's just simply to introduce the terms of reference. The Chair has already set out the reasons behind the setting up of this committee, so I'm not going to go into that, merely to refer you to the agenda item 5 and the appendix where the terms of reference are. For sake of clarity, in respect of the membership, for the purposes of this meeting, the Business Board Chair and representatives will sit as non-voting co-optees. I understand there has been a question raised about that, so I will go back and check that, but that's for the purposes of today's meeting, certainly. And the only thing I would refer to as well, I'm providing this very brief introduction to you, is that review is set to be on an annual basis. Of course, this is a brand new committee, and you do not have to review annually. You can review more regularly than that if you think there are issues which need to be addressed. It'll be up to the board to change any terms of reference, but clearly if you've got any views about the performance of this committee or anything you think that may assist, then clearly those suggestions can be put forward. Chair, unless there's anything specific that you want me to pick out, I've put it there for the board, the committee to note. Thank you.
Fellow board members, any comments? And I will answer this specific question about the frequency of review in the first year. I don't know if people want to wait a year or if they want to. I mean, there's a part of me thinking maybe you might want to do that more frequently, but that's over to the board. Councillor Williams, John.
Thank you, Chair. It's just that there's no mention of substitutes in there under membership, and whether we have substitutes or not, I think it should be mentioned in the terms of reference.
Okay, I know I have seen a list of substitutes, and I believe that has been provided already, but I don't know if it... Sorry, over to you.
No, Chair, thank you. If that's an omission, obviously we'll have that added. That's not a problem. It is a committee as any other, so and I'm not aware of any particular exemption from that, but we'll double check that, and if that's an omission, then we'll have that added in. Thank you.
And I should add thank you to the substitutes for them putting themselves forward for this committee as well. Any other questions around the terms of reference? I'll just say specific challenge. Are we happy with the, sorry, Councillor Nawaz.
Yeah, thank you very much. I welcome your opening remarks. I think it is important that some of the risk factors that have been mentioned subsequently, such as for example, changes in political leadership or shifting government priorities. That's a risk factor. I think it could partly be catered for by having sort of bipartisan, tripartisan consensus following good discussions. And therefore, I think the rest of the terms of reference, if at all possible, could be discussed a little bit more detailed so that we all have the same sort of interpretation rather than a large variety of interpretations. Because, you know, changes in political leadership, there have been precedents nationally, certainly, which tend to change priorities, but having spent so much of public money, it would be a shame, really, having agreed on something that it has to change. But I think that can be mitigated against if there is some sort of consensus on these projects. And it also says here, providing an articulation of what success looks like. What does that mean? This is page 8. This is on the, yeah, you found it?
Yeah, I've got it, yeah, sorry. So there is a question about what does providing an articulation of what success looks like in terms of delivery models to meet objectives such as achieving social outcomes and or a return on investment. or certainly a request for clarity there. Is there something that you can help with?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think it goes back to the reason why the committee was set up. It's all about demonstrating best value. To demonstrate best value and value for money, you've got to prove when things are being put through, particularly to this committee in the first instance, that is where we need to get, that it's worthwhile doing, and that has that value, that continuous improvement and the best value side to it. So it's another way of saying that, basically. So if you are receiving something to this committee, I would expect you to also see it demonstrated as to what that is going to achieve in terms of a best value outcome.
You spoke at length in that first bit. I wasn't quite sure what the final question was, because obviously you talk about a political reality that has actually happened within the own organisation, and arguably I would say is, having lived it, the movement of a change in a kind of political leadership at the Combined Authority did cause significant, well, call it what you want, earthquakes or small rumbles of disquiet. And certainly, I mean, I think we have to build a resilience within the organisation across the thematic committees, but also through the investment committee, is that what's good decisions that are made by a board at different points remains consistent. And you would hope that would happen. I'm not quite sure I understand your question, if I'm honest, in terms of, I think there's a political reality, and I think, you know, I'm being absolutely upfront about it. You know, in some ways, it wasn't so much mayoralty changes, but it's actually membership changes over the last 3 years that have made big decisions more possible in different directions. So, but that's what democracy is about. And if over the course of a 4-year mayoral term, but at the same time, county council terms, whatever, things change and people may want different things. So, and if that's what we are elected to do, and as I would expect them to articulate both on a regional or a local basis, or indeed from a political point of view, it would be a strange thing that if we were to use the current situation of a national government, if we've had a change of national government, but we said, well, everything that was already decided, we're going to continue doing it. Sometimes there will be changes. That's just me speaking out loud, and maybe others might want to say something different. In fact, my business board. All right, sorry. I'm just going to ask my deputy to help me on this one, maybe.
Thanks, Mayor. I was going to say just on a couple of points. If I've understood correctly, the terms of reference have already been endorsed by the board, and we're noting them rather than needing to make a substantive decision today. And obviously, board have looked at this carefully. But the basic point Councillor Nawaz was making around the as I understood it, the approach we seek to take as a committee, I think, is very neatly encapsulated in the voting section of the paper. Any matters that are to be decided by the committee are to be decided by consensus where possible. Where it's not possible, provisions of the Constitution should apply, which is where, you know, procedurally that's right and proper. But the emphasis on the former, that we do seek to work, you know, across the committee, across the districts, that certainly reflects how we seek to work on all the other of these portfolio committees I'm involved in. That's certainly how I've seen the Mayor work over the last few years. So I think the sentiment, I suspect we're all on entirely the same page. I just suggest that from what I can see, the terms of reference provide that steer for us already. But as the Mayor has rightly said, we'll certainly wish to keep these under review as this is a new committee.
Over to you, Al.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to pick up on the point, which I think was a good question to ask, which was in terms of the committee's role in articulating success. Historically, we've been quite narrow in our measures of success, particularly when we think of fiscal investments within projects in the past. And one of the things that I think adds value to this revised format is that actually our measures of success are quite broad now. Sometimes it's about return on investment, EBIT, jobs created.
Sometimes it's about social impact. Sometimes it's aligned with the broader growth strategy that we have in terms of longevity or skills production. And so whilst I appreciate we can all interpret those phrases differently, I would encourage that we don't define them too tightly, because it will compromise you as members to take a view on projects in their individuality, depending on other priorities that might exist at the time.
Thank you, Al. Do you want to come back, Councillor Nawaz?
Yeah, thanks. I think between the four of us, we've more or less covered those points. It was just to reiterate the circumventing of the risk of political changes, leadership changes, or membership changes, that could be circumvented to some extent at least, if A, we all clearly understand and agree on the terms of reference, so that there isn't a wide variation of interpretation. We're all on the kind of same page. And if that is all agreed, we all understand these, then then the possibility of the risk of change of leadership would be minimized. As I said, we are here spending public money, and the public will be ill-served if we spend 1, 2, 3 or X millions of pounds, and then there is a change of political leadership or membership, and then that has to be abandoned. But I think if we, as you have pointed out, Chairman, and the Deputy, that if we go along the route of consensual approach, that would be minimised. Thank you.
Thank you. There's nobody else indicating they want to talk. So as I said at the start, we've been asked to note these terms of reference. And as you pointed out, Deputy, they had been discussed at board as well, which with some discussion. But no vote is required. And thank you for the input and comments on that. Very helpful. This allows us now to move to number 6, the next agenda item, which is the Chief Executive Business Case Decisions. Unfortunately, it was only the first of our meetings, but our Chief Executive is having a break, and well-deserved it is. So Janice Scott, our Executive Director for Resources, will be introducing this item. Over to you, Janice.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this, as part of the single assurance framework that we have here at the Combined Authority, decisions are allowed to be made in different arena depending upon the level of investment. So where the investment is up to £1 million, the Chief Executive is able to consider the business case and make a decision on that investment, and that decision will be published by the Combined Authority. For this report, it notes that 2 decisions have been made as part of that delegated approval procedure, and they are for £450,000 towards the creation of the Climate Action Plan for 2025 to 30, the details of which are set out under 2.4, and £200,000 towards the Cambridgeshire Local Area Energy Plan, of which the details are set out at 2.5. As noted, they are for the production of plans to support the need for addressing net zero and climate issues across the region, and also that that will help provide the evidence base for further support or changes across the region in respect of that. So we're basing decisions on good quality evidence. So thank you. If there's any queries to that, then obviously I'll happily pick them up as best I can. Thank you.
Okay. So first to indicate is Al.
It's just a point of clarification, really. My understanding of the Climate Action Plan is that investment is fundamentally to do purely research and commissioning. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah, working again now, thank you. Yes, through you, Chair, it is. It's about commissioning the evidence base as well to support that, yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I should have probably asked it in one go rather than in two parts. I'm choosing simply to play devil's advocate, which is the level of investment for purely collating the evidence to pull together a plan. Do we have any comparators when we're reviewing those in terms of typical costs of bringing together a plan of this nature? It seems significant to simply take us to the starting line as opposed to actually deliver any impact.
Over to you, Janice. Answer.
That's not what I can actually answer about whether we've got the comparators in terms of bringing an action plan together. Obviously, a plan was drawn up for the previous period for 2022 to 25, so we can have a look at that and make that comparison across the piece. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Would Adrian be able to offer up any insight?
Adrian may be able to, as he's got his hand up, so yes. Thank you.
Yes. Adrian, from the ether, do you want to come in and maybe answer that question, please?
Good afternoon, committee. I hope you can hear me here.
You are loud and clear in Huntingdon.
Thank you. Yes, so yes, in answer to that question, yes, it is to update our climate action plan, but it does cover significant public engagement as part of that process, and also a large piece of work around adaptation. So what we have in our current action plan very much focused on mitigation, so reducing emissions. However, we know we are exposed to some climate risks, particularly around water management and overheating. And so part of the work is to make sure we've got the right evidence base around that. So although it does look a large amount in that context, it does mean we can get the resources in to take this forward. And it's based on what we spent last time, and also an appreciation of what we would need to do on some of those pieces of evidence work.
Thank you, Adrian. Another hand is up from Councillor Nessinger. Lucy.
Thank you. So I welcome both of these coming forward, and that's very helpful. My question is on the energy plan, which is a really, really important piece of work, particularly given the potential growth that's going to be expected from our area. Given the conversation we've just had about gathering the evidence base and the sort of one of the questions about what our future needs are going to be is to do with future levels of growth, which is, while we are fairly clear that this will continue to be, there is, we need to plan for this area to continue to be a growing area as it has been for the last 10 or 20 years. The scale of that expected growth is not entirely clear. I'm just wondering how we're going to be taking that into account when making this plan, which I'm not sure whether you'll be able to ask Janice or whether anyone else can, but maybe if not, somebody can come back to me.
Janice, over to you.
Yes, I suspect it would be one better for Adrian to respond to in terms of the fact that it is his area of work, I believe. So I don't know if Adrian is still on the line. And
Adrian is there. With regard to the energy plan as opposed to the climate action plan, do you have any thoughts on that, Adrian, in regard to the question from Councillor Nessinger?
Yes, so both of these have come forward from myself through the climate team. So on the energy one, we'll be looking at a range of scenarios. So you're correct that at the moment we have existing planned growth, we have emerging growth through local plans, but also we have a wider debate, as you've pointed out, around expectations of more growth. We can only come to some scenario planning around that because we won't have had that information. It'll be concurrent at the same time we're doing this. I think we can address that in the work we're doing, because the evidence base will give us a view on what we need to do to meet different levels of growth. So I think we're aware of the issue. Obviously, we don't have an easy answer because it sort of depends what growth figures you want to put into the into the thinking, but we will do our best to reflect a range.
If you just stay there, Adrian, I've got a question in that. It was only about a month ago. We had a visit from the National Infrastructure Committee. I'm assuming that the need for these sorts of energy plans, did that come up at any sort of discussions that we've had with the National Infrastructure Committee, as they were obviously very keen to talk about that issue whilst they were here? And is there an expectation that all areas have this sort of energy planning going forward to link in with that national body?
So the production of local area energy plans is encouraged, and through the Energy Systems Catapult organisation, that's how Peterborough was funded to do their pilot approach on the local area energy plan. So there is definitely a support for bringing forward these because they allow the area to look at what our needs are and the framework around it in a more sort of coherent way than the individual utility providers do in their own sections. I can't recall, Mayor, the discussion with NIC, whether that was specifically mentioned, but they were very keen to understand the barriers to growth created by energy. And we did make some points around the challenges in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough of being a high growth area and the current planning for utilities being behind the curve when it comes to anticipating demand in a fast change area. So I think there is support for these, and there is a process that's set out through that.
And maybe, sorry, I'm going to come. Nitin's got a question. Nitin, do you want to come in here?
I suppose the question, Adrian, I know you said you've got to sort of work out the growth plan, but a lot of this will also depend on the sort of technologies we use for the industrial part of the growth plan. How are you going to work that? Because this is one of the key areas for a lot of industrial projects that actually suffer, I suppose, in this area because of linking to the networks. And as much as you can talk about it, what's the action? Because it's the building of these stuff that counts. £200,000 will give us a great report, but will it actually do exactly what actions we need, which then have to be financed, obviously, and worked through? But I'd sooner see that in this plan, because I think, for me, it doesn't feel like it covered that from the conversation that you just outlined. Don't know whether I'm pre-guessing, but that would be my question.
A challenge to Adrian and to the Combined Authority, not just a paper exercise. What we're going to do with it?
Yeah, so there's a number of outcomes that we anticipate through this. So one is that I've mentioned the utilities. So they make regular investment proposals that need to go through the regulator. They will only take into account proposals that are well evidenced to the standard that they accept. And we are working with them on the proposals around local energy plans. So one tangible outcome will be they'll be able to take recommendations into their investment planning that otherwise they wouldn't. I think also an element of it is looking at local solutions such as the deployment of heat networks, which do need to be looked at a place level rather than a sort of theoretical level to work through the opportunities. You're right, this is not going to be able to solve all of the future gazing as to new technologies or which types of energy systems might prevail in different circumstances. I think it can only map some of those opportunities. But I think what we've got at the moment is that we've got a very unclear picture across our patch, and we're very light when it comes to arguing our case to government or other providers where we've got barriers if we don't have the evidence. So I think that's another aspect. As part of developing it, we will work with industry and businesses in terms of their needs. I think we will try and anticipate examples, and we've heard already about not just power supply issues in and around Greater Cambridge, but voltage issues in the fens for companies, and other issues. So I think we will want to reflect that in the study.
Another question from Councillor Wakeford. Sam?
Thanks. In my cabinet portfolio here in Huntingdonshire, responsible for economic development and growth and jobs, that point that Nitin raises around the extent to which even currently there is not power infrastructure to deliver all of what's in our existing local plans, let alone potential growth scenarios, certainly occupies quite a lot of conversations I have and challenges we have, which is a function of our, the way energy infrastructure has been planned sort of in the long term. But as I understand, part of the value of these local energy, local area action plans on energy is it's around helping us, move a step towards bridging that gap. So it's not a magic one that's going to solve the capacity problem, but it's signposting approaches to getting there. And on Lucy's, on Councillor Nessinger's specific question around projections and numbers, clearly our constituent authorities, where they are local planning authorities, they don't have crystal balls either, but are doing quite a lot of work looking at what government policy means and possibilities and projections. So presumably we can be reassured that combined authority colleagues are going to be working hand in hand with our constituents' council planning teams to make sort of best use of our combined wisdom and judgment. I know you're already doing that in terms of conversations with us in Hunts as well, but for reassurance, you're not going to be coming up with scenarios in a separate vacuum.
I don't know. Do you want to add anything to that, Janice? Or would we stick with Adrian? Adrian, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah. So in terms of that, yes, I can reassure the committee that we will be working through that. So our climate projects we report also to the local authority place directors meeting. So that's the exec directors representing place, which will pick up planning, but we will be working very closely with authorities around all of this, as we have been doing on the infrastructure work to date.
A few more questions here. Councillor Fulbourn, welcome. Nick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The first points really, on the climate action plan, I've been involved in a number of these over the years. And one thing that seems to be missing is the consensus piece. Everything I've been involved in has been minimised or not been as successful as it should have been because the engagement with the residents, bringing them on board, I think that should be part of that piece that you're putting together, is how and what brings them on board, because without consensus, none of this works. So for me, there's an issue on the climate action plan. We're not having a very specific point around engagement and creating a consensus. And the second part, on the local action plan, I've been involved in, we're quite a way forward in Peterborough. We're doing quite a lot of work on there, and I've travelled all over the place looking at bits and pieces. And I'm not an expert by any means, but what's become I was recently up in Clydebank. I've been as far as Clydebank and as far south as the south coast looking at these things. And what stands out more, the ability, even these small ones, that changes people's lives, changes growth, changes everything, if you can get it right. The one thing that I find really interesting, the biggest constraint to these energy plans and then their delivery is governmental organisations, universities, colleges, hospitals. The way they contract out stops a lot of these plans actually getting into delivery, because the way they're budgeted, it doesn't allow them to do it. So the point I'm making on this plan, that you need to find a way of actually engaging with these local authorities, from a town hall to a hospital to a college, all these and doctor surgeries and everything else, the way they budget, they're incentivised not to go with the local plan, but to go off and actually derive deals or do things themselves. And it's a constraint. For instance, the one in Clydebank, they are struggling due purely down to how budgets are set in the local hospital, the local college, etc., etc. So I think on there you should be looking at how you actually engage and get through that process, because that's where success is. It's a significant issue. Just points, not questions.
Well, thank you, Councillor Fulbourn, from an interesting insight there. On the previous point with regard to the climate action plan, I'm sure our Adrian will be able to, maybe away from this meeting, reassure you around the engagement that has taken in producing the first climate action plan, and obviously going forward how we would like to repeat the successes, but we'll obviously build on where we didn't, there were areas that we didn't get it right. But if I could ask officers to maybe reassure you and come back to you to make sure you know that we have been taking that very seriously in regard to engagement. Over to you, Councillor Smith, for your comment or question.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, it will be a bit of both. Am I? Thank you. The first thing I would say about electricity grid is that it's a regulated private sector infrastructure. So, like all other, like perhaps all other regulated privatized industries, it appears to be broken. We've seen in Cambridge where there's been insufficient grid capacity, the provider only reinforcing grid and providing additional capacity when there is a first mover prepared to pay for the upfront investment, and then the second and third movers take a free ride off the first investor, which obviously is a market failure, and it's required the GCP to intervene successfully, and that actually forced the provider's hand to bring forward the investment. But we shouldn't have a system like that relies on one public sector body pointing out to another public sector body their failure. So it's a failure in both the market and in public policy, and it's broken and it needs mending at the national governmental level. So my question is will this, so historically what's happened is local planning authorities have produced local plans, and in the expectation that the infrastructure will follow where the development, spatial development is delivered. But is this plan going to help inform local plans to where they want to direct development to, because that's where the infrastructure is going to be made available? And then the supplementary question to that is, at what level of detail will this go to? Will it identify, for example, opportunities for neighbourhood level smart grids where energy can be shared between different consumers at different times of day, and it sort of levels out the demand, levels out the peak demand, which is part of the problem. So I'll stop there, and I've got another one to come back on.
Okay. Adrian, I think two questions there. One about the level of detail as being proposed. I don't know if that's something that, well, I would argue that's what the committee can request. It would be rather the way these things work. So question there about the detail we were planning to get to and what you were thinking. And also in the earlier part of the question, which is more of a kind of observation about the system. I'm not expecting you to kind of suddenly come up with an immediate answer there, but any observations you'd like to add?
Yeah, so on the level of detail, I approach is designed to look at those sorts of opportunities that you mentioned, because it's about looking at future energy needs, but also future energy needs through the lens of reaching a net zero position. And so things like smart grids, neighborhood heat networks are all part of building up that picture. I'm not able to specify exactly how much detail it will go down to, but the aspiration is that we would be picking up those opportunities. In terms of the wider network, I think you've articulated some of the challenges that we have been raising with the National Infrastructure Commission when we had the meeting with them around energy planning. And so we have been making that point around some of those challenges of providing in advance of growth and the first mover issue in particular. So we'll continue to make those points on behalf of the area. Whether local plans, I think it's an evidence base available to local plans. I wouldn't want to go as far as to saying it's directing where growth should be most located. That's obviously a wider range of considerations at a local level, but it will be available to local authorities as part of the evidence base. And certainly our work on infrastructure planning is also identifying where there are particular barriers to localities. But I think the aim is to have the evidence base of sufficient quality that local authorities don't have to do it again, at least while it remains current.
And do you want to ask another question?
Well, I'd like to say thank you for that response, because that is actually making this study exceptionally valuable, and it's a welcome investment. Just 2 points I'd like to raise, which is, I've heard that the grid capacity will need to be tripled nationally if we're to fully decarbonise heating and transport. I don't know whether that's correct. I bow to Adrian's my expert knowledge on that, but I'm just wondering whether this action plan is looking to address the scale of that particular challenge, and whether the study will identify opportunities for large-scale investment in renewables in the Combined Authority area. Thank you.
Bit of crystal ball gazing here, Adrian. Do you want to kind of come back on, is that what you understand is up the level? I mean, I know one of the things whenever I go to meetings, everybody's talking about data processing centres and how they consume energy and all these various challenges. Goes back to your point, Nitin, saying about we don't know what we don't know and we might have some hellish challenges. Adrian.
So I'm in terms of the overall challenge, you're right, there is a significant increase in capacity. I've heard different figures mentioned around that. Part of the challenge, I think it's been alluded to already, is demand management and alternatives and smart use of energy at different times, battery storage, enabling energy that otherwise might be not utilized to be utilized at different times. So I think that's something that the study will have as the sort of wider, broader context. There will be a context part of it. And that will be part of how we anticipate different scenarios of getting to net zero. So the utility providers already use a number of approaches, a number of scenarios in terms of take up by consumers of different measures, for example. I'm not able to answer the thing about whether we're identifying specific locations for large scale renewables. I have to take that away.
Okay, thank you, Adrian. I'm very minded that this is going into a more wider discussion rather than the noting of the report. I'm going to give Nitin a last comment, or and Nitin and Al, one last comment, then obviously we'll be asking officers to take away all the officer comments and oversights, particularly for Adrian to think about. But I'd quite like to move on, but over to you, Nitin.
Adrian, one thing I think in this report you've got to look at is what other people do. And the reason I said, is it going to be action-based? I mean, the other cost was 400, this is 200. Even if you look at the size, there's almost a limit to the scope. And I suppose the key to what you're looking for and what we need in this area in terms of energy is a lot of mix of lots of things going on, not necessarily being able to do them all at the same time, but having a map that says these are the things. And I think we should spend some time looking at what other people are doing.
Okay, I'm going to make a final comment after Al.
I'll make it brief, and I appreciate there's been a healthy conversation around something we're just here to note. A constructive comment would be that nobody in this room is disagreeing that that climate action plan shouldn't be high on the priority, and we're doing it.
I'm not saying that, no.
However, the one thing I think I wanted to allude to is, in terms of reporting to this committee, it's new. We hopefully can share feedback to maybe shape future. This isn't new. This is an update to an existing plan. And one thing that might be useful in a proposal is, what was the outcome of that initial plan? What did it shape or do that resulted in benefit? Because we're basically just being made aware that we're going to update and do a new one without any direct conversation about the impact and benefits of the original one. So maybe in future reporting, and this is a really ambiguous topic, it's not one where you can put an exact list of things, but there might be opportunities on some just to provide a similar format to other more traditional projects.
Al, I think actually you've taken the words out of my mouth in what my reflection of the healthy conversation, the importance for the officers to take away the comments that are made, but the sort of things that we've veered into is the stuff that has been talked at thematic committees, and it therefore, as a investment committee, we need to find our way a little bit, working alongside the advice that would obviously be coming from the officers who are presenting the report, and there may be ways that officers can present this information in a more helpful way for us here, without to offer the reassurance that we're not having to. There's some very good points made by Simon there and others about how we've been thinking about these, and I can reassure people I know they have. But the decision was more about we need to go on with it. Thank you for summarising. I think, as you've hinted, no one has objected to it as such. So it was for noting. I think it's time to move on. Thank you for the discussion around it. Maybe more conversation in the next one, which are actually about the investment concept papers. And for this, the Executive Director for Resources will be introducing the item. This is David Moore. All right? Oh, so are you doing it now? Sorry. All right. Sorry, my apologies. I've got David down here. So, Janice, you are introducing, and David, you are in attendance. My apologies. Janice, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm doing the introductions to these, but we do have the experts, I shall quite readily say, in attendance from David Moore and Tim to support on this paper, because this is a paper that actually does request the committee to consider the concept papers that are being drawn up here. These are early thoughts about potential for investment in a couple of project areas. What the issue is here with these two, and these two will also be going on to board in the 4th of September, is that there is no identifiable funding for these within the medium-term financial plan at this stage. And therefore, in order to take these forward, we need to think about how these would be prioritised. So we're really keen to get members' views and thoughts on these concept papers, certainly from the investment committee, and we'll take those views forward as well to board, because these will also be going back, as I say, to board on the 4th of September. So in terms of the two projects under consideration, there's a request for funding of just under £1 million towards Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Impact, which is a business mentoring, coaching and supporting growth programme for the social enterprise, charity and third sector across the region. Anticipated that this will support 375 organisations in initial planning of this, and the KPIs will be developed for this to look about the key outcomes, as you mentioned earlier, Councillor, about the benefits and what can be achieved and articulated from undertaking these projects, what will we actually see from those? And the other one is about to implement the refreshed Cambridgeshire and Peterborough digital connectivity strategy. That is being taken to, or planned to be taken to, the Transport and Infrastructure Committee in September to do that. That is looking at support across the period of around £7 million for this, 2.25 million in year one and 4.75 million for the remaining years. Funding has been identified which could be utilised for year one, but obviously it needs to go, because in order to support the full strategic timeline of this plan, it will be looking for funding of circa 7 million, and that may mean that we need to reprioritise things where we have capital assumptions within the medium-term financial plan currently, or how we prioritise things within the thematic pots that have been set aside as part of that budget. So really that's the main discussion, and we certainly welcome the feedback from the investment committee to feed into that discussion at board. Thank you.
So just to reiterate, we're discussing it today, but it does go to board. But the idea is that the information that's discussed here will be very rich in helping us make our decision when we go up to board. Sorry, I wasn't concentrating. Who put the hand up first? All right, I will come to you, Al, then.
Thank you, Chair. At a high level, I think both are good projects to be taking forward. I think in the context of this group, it's helpful to try, I hope, and provide some constructive feedback. I was looking from commercial, but also looking in terms of social impact of the Cambridge and Peterborough impact summary document. And I think we need to be really mindful that some of the statistics that shared in an attempt to communicate criteria, for me, I think somewhat undermine potentially what the projects are about. I look at a program that says we're going to support the creation of 125 new enterprises and support 125 existing. We're going to increase the turnover by 20%, which is an interesting statistical guide. We're going to create 60 jobs from 125 companies starting up. There's measures in there that I think are perhaps not at the heart of what we're trying to do, particularly when we get into the detail of how many new apps we introduce, i.e. ChatGPT, to the organisations. There are plenty of other pathways that wouldn't involve an investment to deliver that. Now, that's not to say I don't think it's a good concept. I think maybe there's an element of, in the past, growth coaching doesn't always have very clear and easy measures of impact, rather than it's measured on engagement, which can be good, but it can also be entirely not purposeful. So my only really constructive feedback is looking through this proposal in an effort to get sufficient detail. The numbers then feel not particularly credible to me.
Is this one that David? David, do you want to come and
Sorry, David.
start? Well, this is what it's about, because I'd much rather it was being discussed openly in a committee forum. Suggestions that are coming either from within the combined authority or actually as proposals are brought to us to work with us from constituent members. And if the general consensus of an investment committee was it doesn't make sense, or it doesn't, does it stack up, does it work? This is what it's about. So, David, there is a few challenges there, but do you want to come back on with regard to what's in content?
Thank you. So, Al, is it a challenge around, do you think the numbers are not ambitious enough? Can I just ask? Oh.
Sorry, David. No, it's not the ambition. It's that I think we have to be realistic that at this level, trying to provide details on how many new products will be introduced to market is a folly, and therefore you're better not mentioning it than adding details that can't be substantiated. So it's not your ambition. I just question that it doesn't help the proposal to put numbers in that can't be substantiated. Trends and indices are always good. And I'm mindful that to get something across the line and meet criteria for investment, and when we look at ways to manage, sometimes this is a double-edged sword. You've got to put something on the page, So my constructive feedback is maybe we've tried to go into too much detail, and in doing so, it becomes harder and harder to really evidence that. Does that make sense?
It's a good point, and I can't challenge that really. And it's also very what's the word? You know, you try and level it up and say, well, they're all going to increase by 20%. It's sort of slightly missing the point. You're trying to create a new enterprise. You're trying to encourage them to grow, and I suppose what this doesn't include, but it's difficult to measure, is almost some measure of how they've grown and some measure of achievement, which I think you're talking about.
I apologise for hijacking this, folks. I think the constructive point on this, when we're talking about social enterprise, is probably a bigger measure, is having created an entity, how many people, families, homes do they engage with? And that's more relevant with an ambition to whether we think they're somehow going to increase their turnover by X, or that they're going to introduce product to market. Because within social enterprise, we're really looking at how does it grow across our community, and therefore hopefully is sustainable.
Can I just add that sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. Through you.
I'm a trustee of a charity in Leicester that runs a 100-year-old theatre, and we have output measures in terms of numbers of people who attend our theatre in the year, and that's, you know, obviously we have turnover, but actually the real measure, is the number of people who attend, and then feedback surveys on how young people are engaging with that theatre. So you're right, it's about what that organisation achieves in its own metrics, isn't it? Which is difficult to put in this paper because they're all different. But I suppose you need to create a measure in this programme of then measuring that and getting that feedback, rather than just saying it's 10 jobs or 3 jobs.
Yep, absolutely.
Shut up. The reason why this is helpful is I think it comes back to the very first point of our conversation today, which is we're here to define the measure of success. Well, some it is about GVN jobs, others it's about social interaction. And so I would hope this committee gets to say on this proposal, our measure of success is quite different to this one, which is about creating a science park somewhere, you know.
More comments. I'm going to come to John.
Thank you, Chair. I think point well made, and I was going to bring up the point about, you know, we're talking about social enterprises here and not-for-profit companies, and yet, you know, the some of the targets and the criteria are actually for people who are in commercial business developing commercial things and not social enterprise. The other thing problem I had with this is that you talk about the social enterprise East of England strategy, but I couldn't actually find that in the papers, so I couldn't see this in context of that strategy, because that strategy is not in our papers, so that's rather difficult. And the other thing that I can't speak for the other district councils, obviously Cambridge City has, but I mean we have an economic development team, and I wonder how much cooperation has gone on with them to produce this plan, but also to involve them in the future in the delivery of this.
David.
Yeah, well, we're actively, so my team is actively involved with each of the local authority economic development colleagues. You know, I'm meeting them weekly at times to discuss how we do things. So I would very much want this to be part of that engagement and ensure that it is, and we get feedback. I just want to mention one other thing on this, which is especially for social enterprise, a lot of these businesses we support will be wanting volunteers to help them. And I think we need a measure of the number of volunteers engaged, actively engaged, because this is about community development, not about achieving something for an organisation. And certainly in the theatre I referenced, it's, you know, a key measure for us is how many people we're continually engaging in volunteering, because for most of these businesses, that will be the majority of the workforce.
Lucy, and then come back now.
Thank you. My questions are somewhat more strategic, and rather so both of the topics that are here, the projects, I have no problem with those moving forward. My questions are really about how these projects came up, and what the relationship between these projects and the business plan is. When we've done business planning and looking at investment in the past, there's been quite a lot of communication between, well, there's certainly been a kind of a conversation between the combined authority and its constituent areas about things that we might want to be developing business cases for. Whereas I think these ones have just come from inside the combined authority, rather than being co-produced with the combined authority's constituent parts. So I'm not quite sure how that process is going to work in the future, and how the I mean, clearly there's a business planning process that probably many of us around this table are getting into the stride of. Kind of it happens in the autumn, then we make a decision in the spring about a budget. These are coming to us now without, as far as I'm aware, there having been much discussion about what other projects might be in this category. And how these projects versus other projects will then be assessed as part of the business planning process. So that's my question, really. Sorry.
I'm going to give a mayoral answer. Do you want to give an officer? Yeah, I'm absolutely bloody delighted to see these proposals, particularly this one. Yeah. And I think, but you make a good point. You know, I would say that this has been going on for 3 years. And it partly has come from myself as a mayor talking about the importance of cooperatives, CICs, social enterprise, and how my own personal feeling when I walked into the organisation, I could see that there was great work going on, and you know, whoever managed to ensure that some big companies landed in this area to drive our economy. But I felt it was in my initial conversations with many officers who are no longer here, but some who are, there was this kind of, we should be thinking along with the business board, and the business board's changed a lot as well, I have to say, about we can think not just about the big, we can think about social enterprises. So I would say some of this is partly driven by the mayor, and I make no bones about that, but I think it is a sort of, it just so happens that this is the first kind of cases that are here. I would be looking in conversations with yourself as a representative of the county council, but as much as from Fenland or East Cambridgeshire or, you know, the business board, saying, these are the sort of things we should be thinking about and asking our officers to do this. I mean, that maybe is even part of this committee. So in answer to your question, how it's social enterprises have been coming, partly because I've been going on about it for such a long time. And I would also say business board have acknowledged and supported that.
So can I just be clear? My question is absolutely not about the specifics of these projects. I'm perfectly happy with the specifics of these projects. They are good projects. My question is about the process on how projects get onto this agenda, and then how they are assessed as part of a business process, a business planning process. Is that something that's going to happen iteratively during the year, or is there going to be an autumn process and then we make a budget decision and then we don't do it again till the autumn? So it was really specifically not about these projects.
Okay,
it's about
fine,
the
my
process.
apologies. That's an officer answer, maybe.
Yes, thank you, Chair. There is obviously the single assurance framework, which is essentially built up about, which dictates about bringing forward concept papers and business plans, etc. as part of this. We are still in the early stages of bringing the SAF forward, it has to be said. So what was done in last year's MTFP, as you know, is about the over-programming of the capital programme, which created a number of thematic pots about where the combined authority, supported with its constituent councils, would wish to invest in areas going forward. And this is now looking about what that funding can be utilised for. and making sure that they actually are, you know, good investable decisions. So in some instances, there is a pot of money there that's available, and it's a case of putting forward the concept papers, then those concept papers being agreed as a priority by the board to go forward to say this is a really good idea, we want to see further development of this, we want to see a detailed business case that clearly sets out what the benefits are, picks up the comments that yourself and others have made about the things that they'd like to see in those business cases in order to make sure they actually do float. And but then those business cases will come back again for approval prior to an investment decision being made. This is literally the first run through of these projects to actually start to draw out some of those queries as part of that. So therefore that's okay when they're in the MTFP, because there is a pot of money for it. And with the first year, certainly with the digital strategy one, there is a pot for the first year. It is then really the question about when we look at the MTFP going forward, about how does it sit now, and that's when the difficult decisions come, as a priority against other things that we may already have in the programme, or saying that the amount of that thematic pot that you may have thought was going to go on this now needs to be carved out for this because of that over programme that's taken place. So we're looking at that at the moment in terms of looking about the profiling of the capital budget going forward, about what projects are in flight, what projects have yet to start, about if they've, you know, haven't started for a while. So we'll take a look at all of those to understand what capacity there may be in the capital programme where discussions could be had. Obviously, if projects are started, the discussion is not able to take place. We're able to take some of that as part of the thinking going forward as part of the budget discussions, but we're in a little bit of a hiatus at the moment because of the timing of when we've got these versus when the MTFP is coming up. So it's looking really to see about what capacity have we got, and that will come back in the business case to say, well, it needs to be considered as a priority against these projects that may have not yet started, or this thematic pot.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So if I've understood that correctly, for these business cases, these are not most of the money for this is going to come out of a pot that's already been allocated, that is part of the MTFP. And if for future business cases which cannot come out of that pot, they will need to go through the MFT process. So we will get concept papers throughout the year, but they will have to have money allocated as part of the budget process, either preferably as part of the budget process that's already happened. And if that's not the case, then they will need to go into the budget process via a process which is as yet unclear. I'm hoping you're just going to say yes.
Essentially what they'll do is go into almost a pipeline so when funding does become available and we look to the MTFP, then it's sort of thinking about how we prioritise against that pipeline of some of those projects that would need to come forward. These particular projects are not in the MTFP, these two concepts. So, for instance, if the one was taken forward for the impact, we'd have to look if there was any reserve, underspending, etc., that could be supporting this on a one-off basis, because obviously it's a one-off injection of funding to go into that. So we'd look at that as part of the MTFP to see if that capacity exists for this year coming forward. And for the other one, it's available for the first year. For the subsequent years' MTFPs, that is where you'll have the timing in, which will fit into your comments there about that. So sorry for the extra wordings over there. Thank you.
And I would just add this idea of a pipeline. My experience over the last 3 years, and the way that I think we've all seen how government previously would, there was almost like pots to bid into, and if you had a ready structure, a kind of thing, a concept that you could bid into, you were in the right place. Whereas if you were sometimes rushing to play catch up, just by creating that, it will be also very helpful.
I'm just going to say, I do get the concept of the pipeline. I also have reservations about it, because I think things can end up in pipelines unfunded, and then there aren't the conversations that you need to have about the discipline of what you're using your budget for, because people say, oh, it's just in a pipeline. Anyway, that's enough of this for now. Thank you very much.
I'm going across to Sam. I'll come back to you're desperate. I can see Simon. Sam, do you want to come in? And then, oh yeah.
Thank you, Mayor. I have an horrible feeling I may have skipped ahead of people. But,
You probably have, so I'm going to change my mind. Hack, do you want to come in? You gave me such a look. I'm going to.
Thank you. You're very perceptive.
Yeah.
It's forgive me. I mean, I'm not as seasoned as many or most of the respected members here, so I'm going to go back to the basics. In some ways, it kind of overlaps the previous question, the previous discussion. I mean, what are these social enterprises? 375 social enterprises. We've talked about the conceptual pipeline, and so is it to assist to maintain the status quo of the communities, or is it to motivate more kind of aspirational social mobility? Is that the aim? And why do we need 375 organizations to do that? I would have thought that probably education would play a greater role in social mobility and motivating people towards more aspirational goals. So can you, I mean, 375 and so much money, is it to maintain the status quo? Is it just to help the existing status of the communities? Where are we aiming at? What's the ultimate goal?
That's an interesting one. That, I mean, I think it was I'll come to you in a moment, David, but I mean, obviously I'm very well aware it was a previous Labour Prime Minister said education, 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 but I think education isn't always for everybody, and the people who choose to make decisions in their life and how they want to run social enterprises. And often I have witnessed, haven't had the same sort of level of support that maybe they felt they required, was one of the reasons why I've championed the idea. I tell you something, Hack, I would welcome you, and if you've never visited, go into Alia, who are obviously the sort of co-sponsors of this. I mean, I've gone along there and seen lots of examples across the whole of the county, and I would absolutely encourage you to visit there. Come with me. And maybe David, if you want to explain what the sort of narrative is behind what they deliver and life-changing interventions that can be done in terms of a business model. David, do you want to come in?
Yeah, so I think it's reasonably clear in the paper, but it's really to build and expand our social enterprises, whether they're a local health support organisation, or an arts organisation, or an organisation that really wouldn't couldn't be funded or couldn't operate as a privately funded business, because it's not for profit, it's for community development. And it's that opportunity to engage not just those directly employed in the social enterprise, but to then gather and engage volunteers in that process to deliver whatever the aim of that social enterprise is. And usually we're talking very local enterprises here. We're talking about towns and villages. We're not just, we're not talking about, well, we can talk about cities. They've got them in Peterborough and Cambridge as well. But we're talking about towns, village. We're talking about genuine communities. And I think it's a great opportunity. And I've never seen this in any other region, actually, this regional investment in doing this. And I've worked in 4 other English regions, and this is the first time I've seen it, and I think it's wonderful.
I'm going to let you, as a business board member, it seems appropriate to come back.
I think it's a really interesting question and a valid one. And there might be a logic that says, well, from a business board perspective, where would social enterprise fit on the list? But I think if you think of our region, and by no means trying to teach everyone to suck eggs here, I kind of think of our region much like a bucket and fill it with ping pong balls, which are all the operational, profitable corporate businesses. And the gaps tend to be the places where it's not always the first place that business wants to set up. yeah, actually those are the bits across our region where we want to have enterprise and innovation and operations. I come from a background working with roles in education, and I would say education absolutely is a foundation, but education is a continuous pathway, and this is about providing pathways to the training that is business focused, that is about how we take their ideas, their service forward, potentially take product to market. And it's kind of the food chain of the bigger ecosystem of our region, and you have to have the supply chain from the ground up. So whilst it doesn't tick a box in the sense of how much is it adding GVA, in terms of community cohesion and the fabric of our area, I think it's right as a business perspective that it's counted as being just as important at a different kind of layer.
Thank you, Simon. You've been very patient. I will come back. Okay, Simon.
Yeah, thank you. First thing I'd say about this is that this reminds me of a Woody Allen joke when he referred to someone who'd been paid a lot of money to turn an idea into a concept. And so it reminded me of that joke when I read about the concept plans. I strongly support, obviously, the support for social enterprises, but I've got a few comments to make. When I read this, it reminded me of my 25-year career in bidology and grantology. I was very successful, he says modestly, in attracting funding from government and European resources, and you can build a skill in putting together an application for funding with the appropriate KPIs that are going to tick the boxes that make you eligible for the funding. And this reminded me very much of that, and I completely agree with your comments around these KPIs. I think the first question is are they supply side led, or are they demand side pulled? So do the actual recipients of the support services actually, sign up to these KPIs? There would be a risk, in my view, that the providers would end up chasing the KPIs and not actually meeting the bespoke needs for each individual social enterprise. And I think it would be it will mean that we won't get best value from the investment that's proposed. I think it would be a burden. And I think we should have more trust and confidence in the suppliers to do the things for the social enterprise as they emerge and evolve through the interactions with the separate businesses. I think if we are looking for some kind of evidence, I would say we would be looking to link this to the Market Towns initiative and look how this fits in with the wider activities of the combined authorities and local authorities. Talking about access to capital investment. Alia itself is very successful in raising capital bonds, social bonds, and City Council itself has invested in bonds with Alia have money from the City Council that we've lent at reasonable rates for them to invest. And just the general development of donations and grants and volunteering, these are all the impacts I think are more meaningful that we will get from this investment. So don't let's hold them to creating all these new social enterprises. Each one has an overhead. We note that the two CBSs, Huntingdon and Cambridge, are looking to merge. Less is more. So can we just be more relaxed about the specific KPIs here, have trust in this proposition, and wish them every success in this programme.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Sam, and then I think you wanted to come back, didn't you? Sam.
Thank you. I agree with an awful lot of what we've said, including around the specifics of the social enterprise item. So I'll just be boringly specific rather than repeat anything. Though I think I agree with the value of targeting social enterprise more broadly. But in terms of the practical delivery of this, of the first of the two concept papers, which I absolutely support as well, the point was made around the extent to which in our communities, particularly in some of our smaller, more rural areas as well, our market towns and villages of which we have many in Hunts, a lot of this is very community based, and in some of our communities we have quite significant kind of umbrella type organisations involved in supporting voluntary organisations and social enterprises as well, and we've got the partners including the CVS and Hunts Forum from our neck of the woods listed here, but I would hope, and I'd imagine as we're progressing this in more detail, if and as it moves forward, we'd be able to think about scope for looping in existing, perhaps more localised umbrella organisations as well, so that we're not sort of reinventing wheels. And to name check a market town in St Neots, to offer some provision without engagement with the very impressive infrastructure that there is there socially would seem a little surprising. If I may say briefly on the earlier discussion around sort of pipelines and how things get here, I very much do agree with Councillor Nessinger as well as the Mayor about the value of what's here, but also the importance of confidence in how things have got here. And I think the main paper, paragraphs 2.4 and 2.5, run through some of the process that I think implies that we haven't merely been given, the two best ideas that somebody could think of, but actually there's been a process behind that, and we've got the cream of the crop here, which I very much agree are desirable. But again, as Lucy touched on, I think there's nowhere explicit in 2.4 and 2.5 where it's clear how a kind of sense check and input from our constituent authorities is incorporated prior to it reaching here at investment committee and then at board. I think, here, let alone at board, there is possibly not time to have the more kind of informal, in-depth reflections. So I'm sure it is implicit in here in normal ways of working anyway, but I would just make that plea around making sure we're not missing a trick in sense checking things from the perspectives of our economic development teams and others in our district councils in the, as I say, the process in 2.4 and 2.5 especially.
Thank you, Sam. Back to you, Hack.
Thank you. I agree, Chair, and what Al has alluded to. Education per se, I don't mean the academic education, the degrees, university degrees and the A-levels and so on. There are other ways of education, such as the apprenticeships, upskilling. It could be bricklaying, plastering, I don't know, mechanic or whatever. Now, if the fundamental purpose of most of these, not all of those, because I know there are certain more abstract concepts of, for example, community cohesion, which you cannot measure the value of. You can only appreciate the value of those. But with over 3 million, I think last figures I looked at were 3.6 million unemployed and probably around 9 million economically inactive people, which is a very large figure, and I would welcome to be corrected on that. If an element of this is leading to any version of perpetuating the, I'm looking for a neutral term, but if it is perpetuating the dependency culture, we should steer clear of it. But I understand, Chair, what you're saying to help those who are least able to help themselves, and I would fully support that. But that is to bring them out of dependency if they are physically and otherwise able to, come out and fend for themselves, to reskill them, to educate them in the widest context of the word. And that's where I was looking for the sort of pipe of communication between that and between economically active or enabling them to become economically active. That is what I meant. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I mean, obviously, we're here to have those sorts of conversation. I note your phrase dependency culture. The irony is I look at social enterprise and I look at inspirational. That's how I see it. So I maybe they're opposite kind of viewpoints. I would reiterate, no matter what and I'm very pleased to hear how people have generally been supportive of certainly this with regard to the concept paper. I think in the meantime, before we make sure that we identify any funding to take it forward, assuming the board agrees with this, I visit Alia. In fact, I would suggest for those who've not been there before, go along to Alia. It kind of I've learned a lot. David, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to make what may be a closing point, which is that in many social enterprises I've volunteered in, and I've also run, that many people come in as volunteers and they learn skills. They learn how to maybe even just run a shop, be a cashier, do stock control. So there's a pathway. There's a very active pathway from unemployment to confidence in roles and then getting a job, because then they've got a reference from a charity that says they've done really well in this. So it's building your CV for someone who may never have much on their CV, actually.
Thank you. I think I am going to pull things together here. So just as a few pointers, I'm very mindful that we have had the benefit in attendance, Tim Bellamy. There hasn't been a huge amount of comment with regard to the other proposal, which was obviously around the digital connectivity. So I'm assuming everybody has been stunned into silence and just thinking it's a wonderful idea. I mean, it obviously does follow on from the 4 years and the continued success that Connecting Cambridgeshire has delivered, unless I'm going to ask you to come in there, Al.
No, this isn't an excuse just to give Tim an awkward question. Quite the opposite. I just wanted to articulate that there has been quite a bit of engagement with the business board around this topic, talking through proposals, the long-term plan, how that aligns with broader digital connectivity, particularly in terms of that. So this isn't something that's kind of just a paper piece here, but when we've talked about engagement, certainly from a business board, we see that as one of the primary levers that can be used and is kind of pretty fundamental.
Well, that's very much appreciated, and thank you for the reassurance. The proposal, I was just speaking to Matt here before, that there's been a lot of very rich comment, pros, cons, maybe ways that the papers could be presented, information to be shared. Obviously, all of this now as a whole is meant to go to the board. We are expected in terms of investment concept papers to note and comment. You have commented a lot, which is good because that's what it's about. And I think there is something about the process here, how that links into what essentially you alluded to at the start, Lucy, the bigger, wider MTFP process, which we may touch on in the next item anyway. But if I make that as a proposal, that a paper which will not only just summarise the fact that we have generally said these projects were seen to be good concepts, but also why we felt they were good concepts, but where there were not necessarily some challenges across the board. And, we can point to pros and negatives that have been commented on. Is that okay? A nod of the head would be helpful. We have lots of nodding heads. Thank you. We're going to move on. So thank you for that, everybody. And as I say, thank you, particularly all officers who reported there, David and Tim. Finally, well, no, not finally, but to number 8. Again, Janice, you're going to be presenting the report. And again, Tim, you are here as the Assistant Director for Transport and Online. We also have Chris Bolton, the Head of Programme Management Office, and Maxine Narborough, Regional Director for the Greater South East Net Zero Hub. We are here to talk about the Single Assurance Framework and the idea of reporting major project performance and the wider CPCA projects dashboard. Janice.
Thank you, Chair. I think that says it in a nutshell. So part of the Investment Committee terms of reference in support performance management framework is to review the major projects performance dashboard, including the risk associated with that. And this report attaches the corporate performance report for June 2024 regarding the major projects that are supported through the combined authority, these being as listed in 2.2 of the report, which is Peterborough Station Quarter, the University of Peterborough, the Net Zero Programme, the Bus Reform Programme, adult education provision even, business growth service and Market Towns Master Plan. What's also attached to the report is just a little summary document there that we are looking to develop further as we move on towards the Investment Committee over time, is the current landscape of the projects that we have in train, about the number of those projects and their location under what main service areas they sit. But I'd say the main item around that is the update on the complex programmes and projects. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, over to the committee for any questions. Obviously, I understand some of the papers prior to this release were discussed in a more sort of public domain, so I'm keen to understand how we as the committee feel about the ongoing performance and indeed the process of monitoring our process. I'm going to come to you first, Al, as you have your hand up.
I'm just throwing into the ring, I think, on this one here, which is, I think it's helpful to get an update status with the RAG rating of where we're at with certain projects. I think the one concern is it's easy to identify something as green, moving in the right direction, but perhaps it doesn't show quite still the distance to travel to meet the ultimate objective. So I'm just looking here and for challenge saying, you know, there is quite a lot of data around our adult education budget that's moved in the right way, but there are still areas when it comes to capacity and provision that's for development. Does green mask some of the developmental areas in that? Is there more to do? I think it's probably a small piece because one might argue in this context, we've got to be mindful about how much detail is realistic to cover on that. And in terms of the landscape dashboard, I'm not quite sure what it really told me other than just a demography breakdown, frankly, by sector, which is interesting, but it's more, I guess, about which ones are in progress, which ones are concluded, which ones are on target, that would perhaps make it slightly more interactive, in as much as a piece of paper can be interactive.
Janice.
Yes, absolutely on that last point. As I say, that's something that we are working on at the moment to be able to think about how we can bring more rich information to this committee going forward. So we are developing a single project register across the combined authority, which will gather that data that we can provide more effective reporting to the committee. So it is much a work in progress, but certainly want that transparency of those projects about where they are, the scale of them, and their progress. Thank you very much.
Hack, yeah.
Just a quick point of clarification. The Peterborough Station Quarter, I believe there were £48 million of government money sanctioned for it. Was that going through the Peterborough Unitary Authority or is it going through the CPCA?
On this, it was worth the wait, Tim. You will get the full answer from Tim.
Yeah, so the money secured for the Peterborough Station Quarter, so the Levelling Up Fund 2, was secured by the Combined Authority in partnership with Peterborough City Council. We are therefore the overarching sponsor, but the work itself is being led by Peterborough City Council.
Any further questions on the Peterborough Station Quarter? Anybody from Peterborough want to come in? I think I would also add a few other. So do you want to come back?
Just very quickly, where does the Great Northern Hotel feature in this development?
Well, we've got a representative from Peterborough City Council here, and then I'll come to the Combined Authority officer, and then I think I might give, as it's an interesting question to ask. I didn't see him mentioned specifically, but let's talk about it. So, Councillor Thorlborn.
The Station Quarter Phase 1 does not include the hotel because of various issues, but Stage 2, Stage 3 and Northwest Gate projects will have to engage with the hotel. So there's a number of scenarios being run at the moment, but Phase 1 is not got the hotel in it, but I expect the hotel to be moving before Phase 1 is complete, to be honest. That's where we're at. People think they can make a lot of money out of a brick sometimes, is my answer.
Okay, well, you've got the ear of Peterborough City Council, Councillor Nawaz. But as we're here in speaking more on the Combined Authority viewpoint, can I direct an officer answer from that point of view?
Yeah, so with regards to the actual submission of the £48 million submission on the local, the Levelling Up Fund, it was for a transport scheme, so a maximum of the input to that would have been £50 million, and we got 48, which was the joint highest across the country. And the rest of those schemes were around 10 to 20 million. We managed to secure 48. So within that, this is around looking at the eastern and the western access into the station. But exactly what the councillor said previously is that this part of the bigger master plan actually will be looking at the hotel itself. And just regards the where we currently are with regards to the status of the scheme, we are currently undertaking geotechnical survey to look at the ground conditions, etc., which is the main reason why it's an amber rating within the report. Yeah, so the hotel was not included within the submission that was submitted by the Combined Authority, but in collaboration with the City Council. Back with the levelling up round 2 submission.
And as a point of clarity, obviously I remember some of those initial conversations. The Levelling Up Fund, obviously it was a previous government who'd coined that phrase, but it was very much, as I remember, done in conjunction with the MPs representing the area at the time. And I think it's important to clarify that point, yeah.
Yes, Chair. So the submission was with the MPs, with the City Council, and also with Network Rail and other partners as well. So it's a collaborative bid that we put in on behalf of the local community.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Nawaz, I was thinking this may come up, as obviously I had alluded to, that it had been highlighted in the papers, as it should be. And I did make a point of making a few notes, which I think want to share with everybody. I think being here and going through this process, I think almost demonstrates the importance of why we need this committee. I think there's a clear and very noticeable big difference between the Peterborough Station Quarter being a major regional priority, and I think it is for not just the City Council, but for all of the Combined Authority, and actually the project being straightforward, as you've already alluded to, Tim. Something has been made about putting an amber rating. You kind of alluded to, if you put a green one, does that almost make you too complacent? I would love there to be green everywhere, but I'd also like to be realistic. And this amber rating reflects a sort of a prudent, professional understanding of what it takes to deliver a major infrastructure and regeneration program. And it wouldn't surprise me if in the long term, particularly on that project, it may remain amber until we cut the ribbon. The sooner the better, but it may remain amber. I think it would be naive if we didn't take the concept of risk management and just sort of wishing it all away. And I think we need to afford not to be complacent. I also think in sort of demonstrating our openness, our transparency, but I think we have an obligation to be pragmatic in the face of what is unavoidably complicated work, and that takes the specific question about the Great Northern Hotel. Overall, and this is an example, I would hope that all involved, in fact, I know working closely now, working closer than ever with Network Rail, working even closer than ever with Peterborough City Council. I think we need to be able to resist the urge when honesty and transparency is put forward. We don't want to kind of immediately go to a cheap theatre of negativity. I know the Combined Authority over the course of the last few years has had its detractors, and rightly so. But I think we're moving to a place where we're much better well informed, and more importantly, you as a committee and the board are well informed about the performance of our officers and our organisation as a whole. For me, the truth of the matter is that Peterborough and the station quarter specifically are absolutely integral to sort of the local growth plans, and we have been working in partnership with government. We did in the past with the previous MP, and we will continue to work certainly with the two new Labour MPs. I'm really proud, as you know, of Peterborough being one of the fastest growing city. And as a mayor, I think we're in a very fortunate position to be talking about the Peterborough Station Quarter in a very positive way. And I think moving on with some of the ambition that was set out by central government about pushing the devolution agenda, expecting combined authorities to work together as an organisation. And I absolutely see that the Peterborough Station Quarter will be delivered, and it will be delivered very well. But we have to do it transparently, honestly, and be pragmatic about the whole process. So thank you for bringing it to our attention.
It's more of a personal interest rather than a political.
Oh, you're a train user?
I grew up in Peterborough.
Yeah.
I know I represent Fenland. I grew up in
No. You represent the Combined Authority.
And I have naturally great interest in it. It was more of a curiosity, but thank you for answering it.
Well, I had a feeling it might come up, so thank you for allowing me that indulgence. Oh, well, please, there's an invitation there. But again, the idea of authorities working together. Tim, thank you very much for that. As I say, we have other representatives here with regard to other projects that are on there. As I say, Chris Bolton, Maxine Narborough from the Energy Net Zero Hub. Is there any more queries with regard to pointers that people want to raise? And so, taking on board comments about the format, the opportunity that we're here, and obviously grateful that officers were able to be here to answer any questions should there have been them. What to you, Matt? I think in the process with this now, this is again, we bring this to board anyway, don't we, as a regular update. So just to say that we are regularly checking it, but this will be an ongoing process with regard to the investment committee. Again, maybe in 5-10 years' time, the very things that we've been discussing today as proposals will will be converted into actual projects, and then you'll see that if we're still all members and we're still elected representatives, we'll actually see the benefit of making a decision at the start and how it's progressing. I think that's how it's meant to work, isn't it?
Yes, Chair, if I may, I think that's exactly the point. And I think with having this first meeting, as I mentioned, the terms of reference at the beginning that may come back more regularly, this is about getting the feedback which we've had from members staying, which has been incredibly useful, about what you want to see, how you want to see it, and then how that develops. And obviously then adding to that due diligence, which this process is supposed to add to the decision making and best value, meeting best value requirements. So yes, we're going to take a few things away from here as well, and obviously when we come back next month, I know you've got the work program up next, Chair, but next time obviously we'll try and tweak that and take on board the comments that have been made. Thank you.
Of course, it's a floor.
This piece we're looking at now is we're reviewing what projects are ongoing, but the role of this committee is to review and pass through or comment on for the board why are we looking at, and that's a silly question, why are we looking at what's already going on when that's been passed through? What is our real role there? We can't actually change it. All we're doing is viewing and commenting. I know I'm being pedantic.
I
but
know.
Is there any, I'm just the member of the Royal Society of Pointless Meetings. Why are we talking about something that we have no power over? I know it's good to know and all the rest of it. I'm sure we can find that out. But it's a very simple question. Why are we doing it? If we are doing it.
No, I know. My take on it.
For what purpose?
For what purpose? So it's just to kind of go back to my previous point, is that you are right. You know, what's happened and with what's decided around Peterborough Station Quarter, about those other things, that's in the past. But we don't always at board give the due diligence of actually challenging the officers and saying, why isn't that project moving along? Why? And so it's another area for challenge for constituent members for projects that are currently being delivered by the Combined Authority. That is within our terms of reference. What the prior bit, or what we spent doing at the start of the meeting, was clarifying. You know, it could have been somebody could have come to this meeting today and said, "We've got a really good idea. We want to develop the station quarter of Peterborough." It's never been looked after, and we would have, and that's the thing we would have discussed, and we would have asked officers at the Combined Authority to build the case as to why we should be doing an investment in Peterborough alongside the City Council. But we're still.
Yeah, I'll just want to be clear about what I'm doing.
I'm sorry.
Just come back.
Now an officer will give a less emotive.
Just be very clear on what I'm
and then
doing.
I will come to Lucy.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Just be really clear. So our role is also, because if we can actually bring things here for you to pick up from what you just said, we will actually review them and others that to pass on to the board. We will then review the performance of those. And we can actually get officers to change strategy or move.
Much as though I would love you to come with all sorts of suggestions, Nick, you've had some great ideas over the time. I have misrepresented the process, and I will let no. I'll let Matt come in. There's a bit of a warm up before you actually bring a paper to this.
For the first meeting, you haven't had to make decisions on investments between 1 and 5 million. So there will be occasions when matters will come to you and you'll be asked to make a decision on it. So it's been pretty much, this is what you've had for the first meeting. On a different meeting, you may get something differently. As I'm looking up, because nobody else can see this, but I can see Chris Bolton's face on the screen up there. And Chris, who has been responsible for introducing a lot of the work on doing a lot of the work on the SAF, the Single Assurance Framework. I'm going to ask him if it's possible for him to just resend around some of the diagrams, because I'll be honest, we're all getting used to it. I've got mine here, and I'm sitting reading through it whilst you're asking your questions, and I've read it a lot. Okay, so the whole point is it's to get more eyes on things. It's to get the idea that obviously from what's come through before in terms of recommendations being made to this authority, as it improves its governance, as it continues to develop, as it continues to mature, that we have eyes on these projects, that people are looking at them. The comments that you've made today, officers are going to take back and look at. And we're going to try and summarise something for the board if we can get it out in time for next week when they consider some of those papers. So sometimes you'll come in and you'll note a few things and you'll make a few suggestions. Sometimes you'll be approving things. It will be based on how that works. And I appreciate there are thematic committees as well. And I'm the same as you. I don't want the authority to be having meetings where it doesn't need meetings. Everybody's the same, I think. But this has been brought in for a specific purpose, and we'll see how it evolves, and which is, again, going back to the terms of reference point. But today, you may have thought, well, what have we actually done today? But actually, from an officer point of view, I think you've done quite a lot, because there's a lot for us to take away. But again, the decision-making will be different for different meetings. And also, in terms of what you want to bring forward, without wanting to, you can give me a list if you like, for a start, but the next item will be the work programme. And what we will do, like most committees, and you'll be familiar with these in your own authorities as well, is there will be a work programme, and we will take suggestions, obviously, from the committee as to what they want to see coming forward as the committee evolves and people get more used to what's coming and what they may see as issues or challenges or those sort of things. Okay.
Yeah, Lucy, come in.
I just wondered if it would be helpful if I gave an example.
Yes.
So one of the things that we're looking at today is the University of Peterborough project, which is a big project which has been going on for quite a long time. And it's mostly really successful. And it sits officially underneath my committee, the Skills Committee, which I chair. It's not my committee. I have the honour of chairing it. And during the course of that project, I mean, so it was agreed by the board a long time ago before I was a member of this organisation. There have been things that have sometimes gone wrong with it. So, for example, one of our partners pulled out and there was a big issue about how that gets managed. So there have been decisions after the decision that you decide to go forward with a project. Other decisions come along about how you take a project forward as the circumstances change. And I think it's really helpful to have this committee able to look at some of those decisions, because some of them are kind of educational issues, but a lot of them are financial issues, and to have a specific place where we can discuss how we manage bumps in the road in projects, I think is really helpful. Yes. That's my understanding, and I think I saw Janice nodding, which was very reassuring.
We'll get some papers out. We'll circulate them.
Sorry, no, this one is Simon's turn. Simon.
So when I was on audit and governance, it was revealed that the combined authorities overview and governance of the subsidiary companies was falling short, for example. So this is the point about why government has been so concerned about the combined authority, is that it wanted to strengthen substantially across the board assurance and oversight. And so this is just another, if you like, brick in that wall of being able to demonstrate that this organisation is a value for money authority, which was essentially at the heart of the 1st of June letter that we had from the external auditor, and which we've been trying to address ever since. And my view now is that we have a very, very substantial governance system operating across the combined authority. And I think any party looking at this should now be assured that it's been a properly managed organisation. We've got some really outstanding officers now. We've got all of these committees, oversight from well-informed people. And I think the external auditor, it's about time that they said, we are a value for money authority because of that. And I think we need the best value notice removed forthwith.
On a point of that, the best value notice has now passed over. We are still waiting to hear from the government with regard to their position on that, but maybe we'll hear some news in the near future. I would also add, and thank you for your very supportive words, Simon, I think one of the other benefits goes back to that point I made at the start, where it doesn't matter where you're representing which constituent authority. When you start hearing about plans around investment proposals, it is relevant. It doesn't matter if it's talking about in the same way the Peterborough Station Quarter. That's got relevance to the business board. It's got relevance to Cambridge City. It's got relevance to Fenland, and that sort of narrative that you can be part of the success of Peterborough in the same way that the success of Fenland or East Cambridgeshire can be part of the decisions made by Representative Huntingdonshire. That's what a combined authority does, and that's kind of what we want to move towards and aspire to. So thank you, Simon. I believe you want to come back, Councillor Knowles.
Don't be surprised, Chair. I'm going to say I absolutely agree with what you've just said. And I hate to say it, but I did bring this up at the outset, that we should have more conversation, more discussion about the terms of reference. I mean, it is clear, there are two. The first one is in relation to the application of the single assurance framework. Now, that may appear to be meaningless, but further on, it does define what this is. So that is part of it. It may not be applicable only to future projects, but I guess because a lot of these projects are ongoing over a period of months or years or even longer, so we should be able to monitor those and be able to make suggestions, make any sort of criticisms we may have of the processes. And I think have robust discussions. It is from such robust discussions that the collective wisdom arises, and it is a collective wisdom which really wins at the end of the day. However clever one person may be, can't be as clever as 10 people or 11 people. So that would be my answer to that.
Thank you. I don't think there's any. Does anybody who's not spoken? Alan, I'm conscious that you're okay.
Could I come in?
Hello. Is that Chris coming in?
It is, yes.
A voice from afar, but Chris, much
Voice
respected.
from,
Come in.
the virtual world. No, I mean, it's an absolutely wonderful discussion because we're talking about all the governance pieces and assurances and checks and balances that the organisation has put in place over the last, 18 months or so with the improvement plan. Just to answer one of the councillor's earlier questions around the staff process and some of the diagrams, I think Matt referred to it as well. We'll share those afterwards. I think it might be beneficial as well to have maybe a development session to run through the staff and some of the background thinking to it, some of the history, if that would help the committee. The approvals that have come through this committee, obviously we didn't have anything for this first committee. Obviously that will change. We're getting lots of work coming through from all the different areas and different organisations. So that should change by the time we get to the next committee. Going back to part of the function of the committee is very much around performance management. So one of those frameworks I was referring to earlier is all about reporting. And in the terms of reference, it talks about this committee having a look at not only major projects, performance dashboard, but sort of wider project performance. And also lastly, the committee also has a role to look at any of the work that's historical, in delivery, plus anything that comes through with regard to risk. So again, that's why this discussion is so wonderful for me to hear, because we're having all the discussions, being quite open about it and questioning some of the thoughts behind where we are with some of the ratings of our projects. So I think we've progressed massively with the assurance piece, again over to central government around the best value notice. But I think we've made great strides, and this committee being here is really shows that.
Always like to see a happy officer. So thank you.
Long may it last, Chair.
Indeed. I think we've covered that now, and thank you everybody for the input. Thank you for the officers who've pulled together with the report. Thank you for the sort of the ambition, and thank you for the challenge from everybody. Again, summarising it all, we'll take that on to the board now. The final item 9, is the work programme, which is very small but succinct. Is that something that and does anybody want to make any comments on? It's just about some of the things that we are proposing will be discussed. It'll be on the second floor of Pathfinder House. It'll be upstairs on the 30th of September. But there's 3 things there which we're already talking about. And I just wanted to say the note on the offer that was made by Chris with regard to more. I saw a lot of nodding heads. I'd like to take up that option. Yeah, we'll sort that out. He's still there, so he can hear me fine. Sam.
Just on the work plan, it will be brief because I think I've got minus 30 seconds looking at the time. But as you alluded to, it's short, and I'm assuming it's merely whetting our appetite because, as is implicit from what we've discussed earlier, this committee is going to have more on its plate than 3 items at the next meeting. As we're new, I'm sure there's a piece of work resulting in populating it. So, the soonest it is possible to give us that sense of what's coming in when will help answer, Nick's question among others.
I think that's a very good point. I mean, I would, maybe not for the public meeting, but afterwards I'd welcome some feedback about how these meetings will be run, because I've got a sense there's an opportunity that we could go off on a lot of tangents. There's a lot of rich information. But I'm thinking about, well, we'll have to think about meeting length, but also how we. I mean, I want to hear the free discussion. I want to hear people's points of view, but I think we've also got to be clear about what the decisions are made. But isn't that what we're meant to be discovering, Matt?
Yeah, again, I think it goes back to a point which, forgive me, I've made this before. Obviously, it's the first meeting, so having a lengthy work plan is not always something which we can put together. But I do know that it was, in terms of the single assurance framework process, we've had an investment panel, I think only about 2 hours ago, Janice, I think, which probably would have other things which will come forward as well if that's the case, and would fall within your delegation area as well in terms of funding. So there will be more to come up, but we're just at the early stages here, and obviously we've only just started the process itself from our side. So in terms of that pipeline that we talked about, that I know that one councillor had mentioned could always be a pipeline forever, but in terms of that, we're sort of at the beginning of that ourselves. So there's not as much to feed through on and produce that sort of longer term work plan, but that will come, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you to all members of the committee. Thank you for the support staff. Thank you for AV, visuals. Thank you for those who are online. Thank you for any members of the public who indulged in 2 hours of discussions around investment at the Combined Authority. I appreciate your interest. With that, and the note that the next meeting is on the 30th of September and will be on the second floor of Pathfinder House here. I wish you all the very best, and enjoy the last few days of summer, it would seem, and looking forward to the autumn. All the best. I didn't realise it was worth a photo as well, Nitin.